All right. Thank you, everyone who is joining us today. We have an amazing webinar. I'm very excited to hear this, and I know that folks are very much looking forward to this as well. I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for the interest in this webinar today. We have Who Keeps the Dog, led by Karis Naftke. So, certified dog behavioralist, mediator. I'm going to let them introduce themselves with all of their amazing background. I'm Lisa Weiborg, and I have Rebecca Stevens with me. We are co-directors of education for the IAVSW. We'll be recording this session, so you can access it in the future if you'd like to revisit the content. It will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. Our session today is 1 hour. We factored in time at the end for some questions, but it sounds like, Karis, you're okay too if folks, have a burning question and, need to jump out and say something, right? Perfect. We are going to also have at the end, for those who are here for continuing education credits for social work with the ASWB, I will be putting in a link in the chat for an evaluation and a quiz for you to complete both of them to get your certificate for this. So we will be emailing those certificates to you within a week here. We had a couple different changes in our technology for the certificate, so bear with us, but we will make sure you guys get credit for this. And without much further ado, I am going to turn it over here to Karis. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I am so happy to be here chatting to you guys. I must tell you, I cannot think of a group that is more suited to doing the work that I do than veterinary social workers. So thank you for your interest. Thank you for being here. You'll see as we go why I'm so excited that it is that you're here. So I'm going to put, I will refer back to it later, but I'm going to put in the chat box a link to my website and to some things that I offer that you guys can refer back to. But my website is called Who Keeps the Dog. So if you want to get in touch with me, that's the best place to find me. So I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of background on myself, just for relevance about who I am and why on earth I'm giving you this webinar. So my name is Karis. I'm actually, oh, hold on, I have a poodle problem. Come here, come. This is my poodle Zoom friend. This is Bear. I have 3 dogs myself. I think it's always important for people to know what dogs you have for context. So I have a poodle. I have a cattle dog who I had drawn here on my wall because he's too big for my lap. And I also have a little crossbreed rescue as well as 3 cats. So that's my pet context. I also have 2 ex-husbands. I have been divorced twice and remarried now successfully a 3rd time. This is 15 years into my 3rd marriage, so I feel like I've kind of stuck with this one. But that's relevant for what I'm going to talk about. It's kind of a joke, but obviously we're going to be talking about divorce here. So I like to tell people that I've been through it myself. I understand the inside out what divorce feels like, especially when it's not your first time and the kind of the intensity that comes with that. So as Lisa said, I am a certified dog behavior consultant, and I'm also an accredited family mediator. And I started my mediation work only about 5 years ago. I've been working with dogs since 1996. I started my work in Oregon and was really lucky to sort of go to conferences with Karen Pryor and the first APDT conference when all of the sort of positive reinforcement, everything was really taking off in the 90s. So I was really lucky to be part of that kind of circle and part of that wave. And in my work as a dog behaviorist, I noticed something about 10 years ago where I was working with clients who, and their dogs were having every problem you can imagine, peeing in the house, biting the child, becoming aggressive, becoming withdrawn, anxiety, all the kind of issues that dogs have. And when we have an issue with the dog's behavior, we have to look at the why. Why is a dog doing what it's doing in order to find a path to improve it, to resolve it? And I was encountering clients whose dogs were stressed out, anxious, and their cats because of a divorce. Now, I don't mean the owners are currently in the process of a divorce and everything's stressful at home. I'm talking about dogs where a few months or a few years after the divorce has been finalized, the dogs were not coping with their living situation. It was either the custody kind of plan and arrangement, or in some cases, the person who ended up with the dog didn't really love the dog the most, but they had a better lawyer. And now they're stuck with the dog that's like living in the backyard, and they just fought for the dog because they didn't want their ex-wife to have it or their ex-husband. So I was noticing this happening over and over in my sphere of clients. And my mom, when I grew up, was a divorce mediator herself, which when I tell the story is always quite sweet because it's sort of like was the perfect home for me to have grown up in, being aware of how to help people work through conflict, which you all know doing the work you do, work through conflict and difficult situations through good communication, and how that is a more effective way to resolve things really than anything else in most circumstances. So it was from that background of growing up in the world of mediation and my experience with dogs where I realized in doing my research that nobody was working in the field of dogs and divorce with a background in dog behavior and animal psychology and animal behavior. And so there were people who were passionately fighting about keeping dogs, but people weren't having the conversation about, well, should we be sharing dogs? Is this happy for dogs? Are they having a good time living between two homes? What about people who are sharing their cats? What happens in a situation where there's 3 dogs? Can you split them up? And so it's from all of that that I started doing the work that I do. And I'm really happy to give everybody listening a very broad overview of the kind of questions you are likely to encounter as veterinary social workers. Not that you have to resolve the problem from start to finish, but so that you can point people in the right direction. Because I think we all know that a little bit of bad advice or a little bit of good advice can take people in a really good or a really bad direction. And context-wise, every 2 minutes in the United States, somebody files for divorce, okay? Every 2 minutes. And more than half of those families have a pet. And that tells you how enormous this situation is. And when I say this situation, the situation of, okay, well, there's a dog or there's a cat, now what do we do? And so, as you will well know, veterinarians, I think, are often looked at as authority figures when it comes to anything animal related. I mean, I certainly, as in my behavior world experience, I can't tell you how many of my clients first went to their vet, you know, when their dog bit their child, or because their dog won't come at the park, or because they can't house train their puppy. All the things that are not medically related, but they don't know who to ask except their vet. And in my experience in the world of divorce and pet custody, a lot of the clients who find me when I ask, you know, for a background and tell me what's happened and how have things gone, they tell me that, well, the first person I asked was my vet because I didn't even know who to ask. So ideally, you as veterinary, the role you hold in the veterinary world could be that group of people to say, I can handle this one and I can help direct people. So I'm going to give you a broad overview. And for anybody who is really interested in understanding this deeply, I have a full 10-hour for 10 continuing education credits course that I've developed that I can take you through, and I'll talk more about it at the end. But just listen, because if this catches you, you can become a qualified consultant to work people through this situation. So what I'd like to say is that let me start first by talking about the laws around pet custody. So first of all, it's really important to know that the laws are constantly evolving around pets and divorce and who keeps the dog, who keeps the cat. There are, at the time of this webinar, and like I said, it's changing all the time, there are a few states in America, specifically Illinois, California, New Hampshire, Alaska, and New York, that have different custody laws from the rest of the states. I might have forgotten a few states because literally everything's evolving all the time. In that same breath, in British Columbia and Canada, in Australia, and a few countries in Europe, and maybe even Mexico, the laws have changed to view pets not as property, but as sentient beings where we have to consider their best interest. So let me break that down for you. In the states where pets are considered property, what that means is that if there are people going through a divorce, a dog is the same as a toaster or a lamp in that it is an object that one person owns. And so if the two people who are getting separated or divorcing are fighting over the dog and they've both got lawyers and they're going to the judge to say, I want the dog, I want the dog, it's up to the people to prove I own this animal. So that can come in the form of I paid for it, or I can prove I'm the only one who took it to the vet. But it's got nothing to do with who the dog loves or who loves the dog or who actually took the dog, who took, the busy dog to play Frisbee every single morning so it wouldn't destroy the couch while everyone's at work. It's purely a question of ownership. And this is a very layered conversation because when it comes to situations of domestic violence, it's very, very tricky because there's a lot of situations where people won't leave an abusive relationship because they know that their partner can prove ownership of the animal and they're too afraid of what will happen to the animal. So that actually prompts a lot of the law changes. It's very much part of the law that's just changed in Australia to allow people in domestic violence situations to leave knowing they can take their animal with them. In the states I mentioned where the laws are different, and every state's a bit different, all the laws are slightly different. In these places, a judge is allowed and the courts are allowed to look at who is the most suitable home for the dog, who is the dog the most bonded to, who's got the more time for the animal. So the decision can be made not just about who paid for it, essentially. I'm oversimplifying things, of course. There's a couple of states where, in my mind, the law is not ideal because specifically in Illinois and California, there might be more. In those states, judges are allowed to award joint custody. So if two people are fighting over the dog, they can end up in court and the judge says, that's fine. You keep the dog 1 week and you keep the dog 1 week. It's shared 50-50. It's equitable. That's the story. And this is, for many dogs, the worst case scenario, because as I'll get into, being in a situation where they are constantly moving back and forth between homes can become incredibly stressful for the animals. In other states, joint custody is not allowed. And so the judge, the people have to try to prove who is the most ideal owner for that dog. So my suggestion to those of you listening is to do some research about your state. What are the rules? How does it apply? Because it will also impact how you can be the most helpful for people. So now, as much as I'm talking about the law, it's important to know what the laws are, just as a broad, you don't have to be lawyers, but just so you have a vague sense of what's happening. However, the rules about pet custody only apply if the separating couple are fighting. So together, they can make whatever agreement they choose. So if it's an amicable separation, if they're both, being reasonable and wanting to make a good decision that works best for the animal, they can decide, person A or person B can keep the dog. They can decide to share the dog. And if they do this through a mediation process, the court is not going to step in and say, oh, you can't do that, because the courts don't have time for that. So in other words, the rules around the custody is only relevant when, I say it when people have lawyered up, when there's usually two lawyers involved, both people are fighting and they are relying on the courts to sort of make the decision for them. Sometimes that's necessary. Obviously, not all divorces are friendly. We all know this. But I'm bringing this up because when a client comes to you and says, listen, my partner and I are separating, what should we do? What you should suggest to them to start with is to work with a mediator. And a mediator is a neutral person who helps two parties work together to find a solution that works for them. And I always say the people who own the animal should be the ones making the decision about it. Mediation is the best starting point, provided there's no domestic violence happening. Okay, if there is a situation where there is coercive control or there seems to be some domestic issues, mediation might not be safe. And in that case, a lawyer is probably the only option. But when that's not the case, when people are just a bit like, oh gosh, now what do we do? You want to start with mediation because it can be the most peaceful way to a resolution. Now, one of the most common assumptions, and so tattoo this into your brain. I've heard this conversation a million times, is that people will say to me, or they'll say, I'll hear about clients via people, that, oh no, they're not going to go to a mediator. They've just decided they're going to share the dog. They both love the dog. And so what's dangerous about that sentence is that they're making a verbal agreement. And verbal agreements are very, very dangerous in this situation. I say dangerous is maybe the wrong word, but they're not a smart thing to do because the emotions around breakups change with time. And I cannot tell you how many tearful, sad people have told me how when they broke up with their ex, you know, my ex said that we'd share the dog, and now they just moved to Florida and took the dog and won't answer my calls. So you have to sort of assume the worst scenario, which is one of the two people might get into a new relationship. They might get a job offer in a different state. They might just get irritated and not want to deal with their ex anymore. And those verbal agreements just poof away to the wind. So it is crucial for clarity and fairness that there is a written agreement. The challenge is that initially, if people's are fairly kind of amicable in their breakup, suggesting a written agreement implies a lack of trust. And that is the tricky conversation. And so that's where you have to use all your people skills to say, you know, things like, well, with a written agreement, everybody can relax. There's no ambiguity. Everything is super clear. You know, you don't have to tell them that things might go sour, even though it's very, very possible. So it's for clarity, it is super important. And that's what mediation can do for that. The other reason why it's really, well, I'm going to get on to sharing dogs in a minute. So when people come to you in the role that you are, suggest they find a neutral person who can help them work out a written agreement. And if they say, oh, no, it's fine, we've just, you know, we've worked it out ourselves, you can pose questions like, well, the reason why it's helpful to have a written agreement is, what if you decide you're going to move in 2 years? What then? You know, those kind of things, just to spark people's thoughts about what could happen. You don't want to be doomsday-ish about it, but you have to be realistic, because I could have saved so much heartache and sadness if the world magically, I could fairy dust everybody's brain and they would do this. So what I want to talk about now quickly, I'm going to pivot to something very practical, which is a common thing. And this is, what do you do in houses where there's more than one dog? Can we split up the dogs? I'm going to talk about cats in a minute, so I'm just going to keep this particular little bubble about dogs. I'm working with a client now who they've got three doodle-ish dogs, let's say, and they are trying to figure out how can they separate them, because they've both decided in fairness that each of them should at least have one of the dogs. So there I kind of put on my behaviorist hat to help them look at the relationships between the dogs and how they can be best split up. So the first question you're likely to get from people is, can I split up my dogs? Can we even do that? Is that okay? And if so, how do we do that, and under what sort of context? So first of all, dogs can be split up, okay? But ideally, if there are a pair of dogs who are very bonded with each other, you of course would not want to split them up if at all possible. But the fact is, in a divorce or in a relationship ending, there are so many factors. You know, there's people's finances, there's people's living situations, there's people's jobs, and it isn't always realistic to keep the dogs together. Sometimes there's just no choice. So especially if like, and the other thing to think about is that for some dogs, it's a relief to be split up. It's like, oh, thank God, I didn't really like that dog anyway. Now he's gone. And this I find a lot more common in houses where there's two dogs of like very, very different ages. So if you have, you know, how well-intentioned people, you know, they might have like a 12-year-old Labrador and they're like, I know, I'm going to get him a Labrador puppy so he'll feel young and happy. And of course, the old dog is now miserable because he's got this annoying dog that won't let him sleep. So in those kind of situations, splitting the dogs up can actually be a great kindness to the dogs. Or if there's just two dogs that are not, you know, not a good match, like an Italian Greyhound and a Bulldog, which I literally had the other week. Someone thought this would be cute to get those two dogs as a pair. And of course, the Italian Greyhound was almost broken all the time. So those kind of situations, the dogs can certainly be split up. Or if there's just underlying tension between the dogs, if you know, the dogs are kind of walking on eggshells around each other. Maybe they don't feel confident enough to get really excited if the other dog is around because they're afraid they might get into a fight or a little scuffle or something. Those dogs, it can be a wonderful opportunity to split them up if they do it. So if there's personality conflicts between the dogs, behavior issues, or there's just no option, you absolutely can split them up. However, this is the important part. Once the dogs are split up, you should not bring them back together for play dates. Interestingly, this is one of the most common scenarios where dogs will fight with each other, is when, especially if there's been a little bit of tension and the dogs get separated and then they come back. Often they'll have like little fights and scuffles at the park, which is really troubling for people. The other reason, if the potential is not there to have a scuffle or a fight, is that the dogs will have this wonderful reunion with each other, and then you rip them apart again. And you have to think about it from the dog's point of view, that that is not a fun thing. It's fun in the moment of reunion, but then you're completely pulling them apart again. And that's harder on them than having a clean split and they both go and live their separate lives and go separate ways. The other reason why having play dates at the park is not, it needs to be, I say it needs to be approached with caution, is a very nice way of saying we need to be careful about it, because there are some people who, when their relationship is over, often without realizing it, but they will use the dog as an excuse to keep tabs on their ex or not quite let go of them. And for some people, this becomes a really hard dynamic where they agreed to let their ex visit the dog, but without realizing it, what that means going forward in the months and years is that they can never really let this person out of their life. That can become toxic for some people. It can just become really tiresome. It can stop people from moving on with their lives. And so for various reasons, it's not something you want to casually put into a written agreement. Like, oh yeah, you can just visit the dog whenever you want, because what you're saying is you can also visit me whenever you want. But we'll get on to details with that in a moment. So when people, oh, Marjorie, I think you're not muted. Do you mind muting yourself? I just hear a thing. Thanks. Thank you. So now I've alluded, as we've been talking, I've been talking about sharing dogs. Okay, so this is the hardest part of my job, is having the conversation with people about, can they share their dogs or should they share their dogs? From a dog's point of view, living in a shared custody situation is less ideal than having one loving home. Now, we being animal professionals, you know, we've I mean, I'm sure many of you have worked at shelters. I've certainly spent many years working in and out of animal shelters, kind of both on the end receiving the dogs, helping them adjust to shelter life, and then working with them to integrate to their new home. And dogs are surprisingly adaptable to new situations, you know, provided that they're well taken care of and, you know, all the other needs are met. I think I've certainly been surprised at how, oh, dogs are pretty adaptable. It's like, oh, my life has changed a lot, but now I'm happy and now everything is fine. So when we look at people going through a divorce, one of the biggest challenges is people will start referring to their dogs as children. Okay. And we all, I mean, I call my dog, I mean, like, you know, that's just part of our new cultural language, is to call herself a dog mom and a dog dad and a cat mom and a cat dad, and that, you know, they're the fur kids, and that's lovely and that's very sweet. There's nothing wrong with that. But what is troubling is when people will say things to me like, well, I can't, you know, I raised the dog, I'm his mom, he can't live without me, or I can't live without him, or no, this dog is my child, therefore I could never say goodbye to the dog because he's my child. And there's this kind of humanizing onto the relationship of dogs that can become unhealthy if people are insisting on sharing the dog in the same way that they would a toddler. So some people want to do shared schedules where they swap the dog every 2 days, or every 3 days, they swap the dog back and forth. And so the real art, I would say, of doing this kind of work with people is having the real kind conversation to help them understand that if it turns out that your ex is the one who does keep the dog, your dog will be okay. You might have to go through the mourning and the loss yourself, but don't imagine that your dog won't survive. One of the women who I work with who just finished the custody course, she brought up such a good point when we were talking about this, because she is a puppy raiser for service dogs. So she's got 2 of her own dogs, and every year she raises a puppy, you know, to go work in a service dog program. And that puppy is obviously very bonded to her, and she's very bonded to it. And then there's a big life change and the dog is fine. And so it's important that you help people not put their own emotions onto the dog. Like, the dog won't survive without me is not accurate. You might feel like you can't survive without the dog, but we can't make a decision about the dog's future with that kind of muddled thinking, because it's not healthy to put that on the animal. So when people are thinking about sharing their animal, there's a lot of things they have to consider. So the first is that not all dogs can cope with it. There's no way to know when you start a situation like that how the dog is going to be. So when I say the dog won't cope with it, what I mean is you get dogs who start showing incredible signs of stress, like running in the closet and hiding when they're going to have to go to the other person's house, not wanting to get in the car, not eating for days when they transfer to the new home, skin issues, soiling inside the house. Some dogs become aggressive. A lot of the dogs I work with, end up biting children during this transition time because they're so stressed. And the kids, of course, want to hug the dog to feel better, but the dog isn't coping with what's happening. So if we look at the dog's behavior and the signs of stress that dogs show, for many dogs, it's just not a situation that they are coping very well with. Now, of course, all of these things I've described of stress signs of dogs can, of course, be a sign that the dog is sick. So you always have to, check the dog out at the vet to make sure it's not a physical illness. But the challenge is, I've kind of been hit with this situation recently so much where people are sharing a dog. The dog is completely anxious and stressed about this. And they've decided just to put it on anxiety medication, but insist that the dog is still shared between them. And to me, that is just not a fair choice on the dog, because if you know the lifestyle the dog is living is stressing the dog out, why would you keep doing that for the dog? So I can't sometimes I have to really be the voice of reason with people to say, this is, before we want to put a dog on long-term medication, we want to see, is there anything that can change in the environment so that their stress levels just naturally go down, rather than medicating a dog to stay in a stressful situation. It is, in my opinion, it's selfish, and there's got to be a different conversation around it for the sake of the dog. So when people are thinking about shared custody, what I always recommend to them, and when I do mediations, it's something that I'm quite insistent on, is they have to do it for a trial period. So this can be something like 3 months or maybe 6 months, where there's a real honest conversation. Oh, I have to let my dog out the window. Don't go anywhere. Hold on. I think I said let my dog out the window, but I meant let him out the door. He was looking out the window. So we have to be realistic about sharing a dog. Some dogs are fine with it. Okay, some dogs are like, yeah, whatever, life's cool, I don't mind, but not all dogs. And we will only know, the owners will only know after they try it for a while. So that's something you can also bring up to them if they're thinking about sharing the dog. It's like, okay, we won't know how the dog is doing until you try it for a few months. So that's the one suggestion, because many dogs just simply don't thrive. And it doesn't mean they don't love both people, but it's just the kind of back and forthness of their life can become very overwhelming for them. The other reason why shared custody can be the wrong choice for some people is that many people realize after a few months that they don't want to be in constant contact with their ex. They actually don't want to spend the next 5 or 10 years messaging and chatting about the dog. And this becomes especially apparent. The biggest turning point for a lot of people is when one of the new people gets into a new relationship. So a very, very common scenario happens where it's like, it's fine, we're sharing the dog, it's no problem, we're easy with each other, no worries. And then suddenly there's a new boyfriend, a new girlfriend, and the presence of this new person suddenly makes everything feel off kilter, because the two original owners are still so involved about the dog with each other that it just starts to feel kind of strange. And that the new relationship is very often the sort of the straw that breaks the camel's back, where if there isn't a written agreement, people just disappear with the dog. They just say, nope, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm keeping Rover, goodbye. You don't want to preempt that for people and sort of tell them what will happen, because one never knows. I'm just saying this has been my experience of this, and all the people I work with around the world have echoed the very same pattern that occurs. It was really funny the other day I was getting my hair done with a new hairdresser, and we were chatting about what I do. And she said, oh, that's so interesting, because I've just started dating this new guy. But it's very weird because, every 2 weeks he swaps the dogs with his ex-girlfriend. And, if they're swapping the dogs, he makes me leave the house, and I don't feel good about it. The whole thing's weird. And then I went back to her a bit later, and she said it almost broke them up, because her new boyfriend was hiding her from the ex because he didn't want to make the ex feel bad. And they just were very, very enmeshed still about these two dogs. So the two main reasons why shared custody often does not work, not always, but often, is that the dogs don't cope and the people don't cope. So it is kinder, I think, to tell people this at the beginning than to sort of say, oh, cool, well, if you're both in agreement, then everything will be fine, because you don't know it'll be fine in the long run. And we don't want to be unrealistic about, it's like anything, even related to, behavior of animals or, medical issues around animals. You have to be honest about the possibilities and the potential outcomes. And it's exactly the same with sharing the dog. Many people assume sharing the dog will be fine, and they kind of insist on doing that, and then that's their choice, but that's when you can suggest the trial period for them. The other thing to consider about sharing a dog is the breed of the dog, because dogs are very different. My cattle dog is not the same as my poodle, and which is not the same as a rescue dog that came from an abusive background or a working line German Shepherd. The qualities of dogs are so very different that you cannot paint dogs with one brush. Broadly speaking, the group of dogs that is least likely to cope with shared custody are the guarding breeds. So I'm talking about the Shepherds, the Rottweilers, the Malinois, the Dobermans, the Cane Corsos, any dog that was, their original purpose was as a guardian of flocks, a guardian of property, a guardian of people. Those dogs are genetically wired to, first of all, have one primary person that they're mostly attached to, and to have a primary property that they feel is theirs and they want to anchor there. And that's kind of gives them their purpose in life. So Sam, my cattle dog, as cute as he is really my husband's dog. I mean, honestly, I just as a very cute side note, I used to compete with him in agility. Like that was my dog sport. Yay, I love agility. And the one time when we were in like the top grade of competition and we were at a long weekend course and it was the last round of the last day where sort of, you know, the 10 best dogs were competing against each other. And Sam and I were on the field, like in the middle of our 30 seconds of agility. And right at that moment, my husband pulled up to watch and Sam left the course. He's like, oh, it's Dad. And he just ran off. There I was in the top competition. So cattle dogs also, I would put in this category, are more wired to be bonded with one person and will struggle more moving back and forth between homes. Now, again, I'm making very broad statements. So there's certainly individuals where that wouldn't be the case. And there's plenty of other dogs who also can't cope with shared custody, even if they're an easygoing breed. But it's just something to be aware of, especially a working line guarding dog is going to struggle not having a consistent person. And in the long course that I do, we go into this in great detail, all the breed types, the rescue dogs, etc. But like I said, it's just to sort of get your mind thinking about the questions you're going to get likely to have. So the other, to go back to sharing a dog. So let's say people do want to share a dog. Cool. That's what they're going to do. That's what they're going to, they're committed to making it work, or they want to try anyway. This is the best practice for sharing a dog. So the first thing that we want to do, I said earlier, you know, having a dog move back and forth 2 or 3 times a week or even once a week is not great. You want to minimize the amount of times that a dog is exchanged. So what that means is you want the longest visits that the people can handle. So I never recommend shorter than a 2-week visit. And if the people can handle it, it's better to look at like 1 month at a time or 2 months at a time, rather than something like swapping the dog every week. And I have a client now, it's really sad to me. She's in California and in California, dogs can be allotted, that the dogs get shared. And this dog is a large breed dog. She has diabetes. She's had 2 cruciate surgeries. She's got skin issues. And she's a very fragile dog. And she and her ex-husband went to court saying, we want the dog. And the judge just said, nope, you keep it 1 week, then it's fair. And this poor dog is one of those dogs that's hiding in the closet now and won't eat. And when the dad's car pulls up, she's shaking because she's so stressed about being stuck in this position. And that's a 1 week swap and split. So suggest to people, in other words, a common assumption is people think if they change the dog a lot, the dog will get used to it. But what happens then is the dog is in a constant state of adjustment. So longer visits are better than shorter ones. And the thing that I definitely recommend people don't do, and someone I actually work with, this was actually written in their agreement, not by me, in their divorce agreement, that every night she was allowed to call the dog to say goodnight. Okay, like FaceTime with the dog. And this to me, again, is a sort of a humanizing situation where it's like, okay, why would you alert the dog to your presence when you're not physically there? And that's, that's missing the point of what makes life easy for a dog. And FaceTiming with someone every night is not something that can be recommended from like a dog behavior, because a dog every day would get excited, and then of course she isn't actually there. So longer periods are better than shorter ones. And the other thing to do is that when people are exchanging the dog, rather than having someone pick the dog up at the house, it's better to either hire a dog walker whose specific purpose is transferring the dog, or people agreed that there's a specific park or a neutral place, wherever, that they only meet at to exchange the dog. And this is the case, and I write about this. This is my book too, which I have, and I write about this in detail in my book about why we do this behavior-wise. But if the person is coming to the house to pick up the dog, can create a lot of anxiety issues, because the dog is always waiting or wondering at the door, like, oh, maybe that's my person, maybe that's dad, maybe that's mom. Whereas if there is a specific neutral place that the dog knows is handoff place, the dog also knows when they're not going to handoff place, it's not it's not an exchange day. So the dogs are calmer. If they're never sure if it's the day, they're always a little bit more on edge often. So a specific, don't do it at the regular dog park, because then every time you're at the dog park, the dog's like, oh, am I getting picked up? Some of my clients do this at daycare too. Like one will drop the dog at daycare, the other one will pick the dog up. That can also work. Or like I said, a third party to walk the dog or taxi the dog to the person. This also minimizes the need for the exes to interact. And that can be helpful also if because some people will use dogs, like I said earlier, to kind of keep tabs on their ex, like, oh, let me just peek in the door and see if, there's anybody else in there with you while I pick the dog up, which can become very, very toxic for people. So that separation also can make it a little bit more feasible. In other words, do you really want to share the dog, or do you really just want to kind of stay in touch with your ex for a long time? And a lot of people are not consciously aware of that, but underneath it, that's part of the reason of not being willing to, maybe one of the people let go of the dog. Now, before I open for questions, I want to talk about cats, because I've been talking about dogs, and what about the cats? So cats don't come up as often for me in my practice. They certainly do come up though, but more of my work is really about dogs. I think there's more, because of the qualities of dogs and the kind of relationships we have with them, it's, for some people, it's harder to think of letting the dog go, or they just assume it'll be easy to share the dog. So the question is then, what about sharing a cat? Can you share a cat? And unless it is a magical cat, the answer is no. You don't want to do shared custody for cats. This is because, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but cats, because they are territorial animals, are so connected and grounded to the place in which they live that moving them back and forth just becomes too stressful for them. And I have had clients who've tried it, and luckily they've all realized it really fast that it's not working. And I'm going to answer that question about chihuahuas in a minute. So basically, sharing cats is simply not a realistic, healthy plan for almost all cats. And the most typical behavior that we see from cats who are being shared back and forth is they start, soiling in the house or licking themselves to pieces. A lot of cats that I work with, or that my clients have, it's like they get sick faster from the stress, whereas dogs will just not necessarily get sick, but they'll behave in a way that obviously shows they're stressed about the situation that they're in. So if people have more than one cat, and then the question, like with dogs, is, okay, well, can we split the cats up? And cats are different than dogs in the sense that, I suppose dogs can also just live with a cat. I mean, sorry, dogs can also just live with a dog they're not great friends with, but it's more obvious in the relationships between cats. I mean, I'm sure we all know people, or maybe yourself, like I've got this certainly, where you have cats that live in the same house, but they have zero interaction. Like, they don't groom each other, they don't sleep with each other. They're just sort of ships passing in the night. And then, of course, you have the cats who are adorable and they groom each other and they cuddle with each other and they eat at the same time. And so it's much more obvious with cats if they have bonded. Specifically, do they groom each other? Do they sleep snuggled with each other? And do they choose to eat together? Those are the most obvious signs to know that cats are really connected with each other. And again, unless there's no choice, you don't want to separate those cats if there is any way around it. But just like with dogs, if you have to separate the cats, if the circumstances, that's what they are, you wouldn't want to bring them back together to like have a visit and then separate them again, because that's going to make their life harder than simply, adjusting to the change and living their life as it is. So, and the cat question also is tricky because with cats, you have to very much look at their house situation. Are they used to being an indoor cat only? Are they indoor outdoor cats? It's very hard to, for example, take a cat who's had access to a big neighborhood yard and put it into a third floor apartment where it's got zero outside access. That's a hard transition for most cats. Whereas if a cat was in an apartment and can go to a house, it's usually a little bit easier for them and works a little bit better. So with cats, you have to kind of, as I said, look at the whole living situation, as well as who they're bonded to and how much and everything like that. That's okay. So that's me. I'm done. I want to see what other questions we've got before we move on. I'm going to put now in the chat a link to the course that I offer in this. So for anybody who wants to do this, I've got one more course this year, and then I've got another one in January. I teach it live online. It's 5 2-hour webinars where we go through how to be a pet custody consultant in huge detail. It's really fun. It's great. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer a discount to any of the veterinary social workers who want to come. So please reach out to me. I'm going to give you all a 15% discount on the course because I really think that you should do it. But you can reach out to me on my website or my email and do it. So that's my little nudge for the course. And other than that, if you have any situations where something like this is arriving, you can email me, you can ask me for support. I'm always happy to help out and answer questions in any way that I can. So Danielle, I just want to clarify about your questions. I'm not sure if you're being serious or being a joke. Daniela asked, what about Chihuahuas that guarded people overnight because of the barking? Are you there?
Yeah, I'll just talk so I can be faster.
Okay,
no, I'm being serious because like I would consider them atypical guard dogs because they did actually like their purpose was to be like little backpack dogs that would alert if people were around. So they're not, they're not big, but their attitudes are, and they definitely guard.
Yeah.
So would it be considered the same of separating?
Yeah. So ironically, I also don't recommend sharing tiny dogs in general because they're so sensitive to stress because of their size. So,
okay.
but also for that, yes. So because yes, any dog that's very, very attached to one person really shouldn't be shared.
Okay.
So definitely fall into that category. Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Yeah, you're welcome. I love Chihuahuas. My parents used to live in Mexico, right near the town of Chihuahua. And in Mexico, the Chihuahuas are street dogs, and it's the cutest, coolest little Chihuahuas. I kept trying to steal them, but it didn't work. So I'm just kidding. Okay, but the floor is open. Who else has a question or a scenario or anything that I can answer?
Hi there. My name's Laurie. I came in a few minutes late, and when you were talking about the state laws, and I was wondering if you could share where to best find the state laws on when animals are considered property versus when they're considered sentient beings.
So just Google it. Just say, what are the
Okay.
pet custody laws in Colorado? And it's pretty straightforward. If their needs can be considered, or if they are just property. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go for it, Pat.
Hi, thank you. I'm just curious if you have best practices regarding the financial piece to sharing the pet. Do you get involved with that? Is that something, yeah, what would
Yeah.
you recommend?
Well, so I would say, oh, nice Chihuahua, Lori, very cute. So I do get involved with that. I think that people have to look at if they're sharing the dog or if they're not. And then they have to, usually if people are working with a mediator, then the mediator would go through all of the financial things. But you have to look at the whole scenarios of the dog's whole life. What happens if the dog gets sick? You know, what happens if one of you die? Is the dog in your will? Where's the dog going to go? So yeah, you do have to sort of look at the whole life of the dog and all the as much as possible to anticipate different scenarios, so that a lot of my clients who share their dog, they have a joint account and the money goes in for the dog that's there. And then you have to ask the tricky questions like, okay, well, you know, if the earning potential of the two people is different and the dog has a serious accident and the one person can't afford veterinary care and the one can, what then? So it's a bigger question, and I'd go through that in the course kind of more specifically to talk about those kind of questions. But the short answer is look at the whole of the dog's life, all the potentials, and you ask all of those questions. Yeah.
I have a question. So as far as I know we're in IAVSW, we have, it's interdisciplinary, but for the social workers here today, right, we're all about like resources and things like that. So obviously too, if we feel like someone like you, either you or someone that has has done your course and things like that, is there like a directory or a way that, people can like look those people up to be able to start to involve them? That's question one. Is there a directory? Also question two, are there times that you've like kind of collaborated like with like a social worker or like other mental health providers, like in a collaborative way, like in some of these situations?
Yes, and yes, absolutely. So I love collaborating. So I often get therapists involved. I have kind of a whole roster of divorce experts. So there's a lot of therapists I work with that work specifically with people when their relationships are ending, just to guide them through that process. And I find that really helpful because it helps people allow for their own grief without imagining the dog is the one grieving. It's like, and to put it quite simply, but just to work through it in a deeper level, and what does the animal represent, and all of the emotions around such a huge traumatic thing that people can go through. As far as a directory goes, I don't have a directory on my website, but I would ask everybody to just email me, let me know what state you're in, and I can connect you with people that they can work with, because it's really smart to have. I would really recommend that all of you here, you have someone kind of on tap that you can refer people to, so that, because again, when people come to you in that vulnerable asking a question time, you want them to get the right advice. And I mean, there are lawyers out there who will literally say, listen, this is what you do. The next time they give you the dog, just don't give it back, and then it's yours. Then they need a court order to get it back. And so you don't want people to become aggressive about it if it's not necessary. There's some situations where that's no choice, but that isn't always the case. So that's why we want to go in the mediation route. So yes, please, everybody email me. I'll give you a list of whoever's closest to you, definitely. Oh, if anyone has a dog to show, please show me, because I love seeing dogs, by the way. It always makes my day. I know you all have animals there by your feet. There we go. There's it. There's a Chihuahua. Good job. So sweet. My dogs have all just left. So yeah, so I don't have them in here anymore.
Thank you, Karis. This was amazing. I don't know about everybody else here, but I learned so much. You practice in the field or, for a while or you're new. And I think every opportunity to learn something just unique like this is fantastic. So we really appreciate all of your wisdom that you've brought today. We did put the links for the quiz for continuing education as well as the evaluation. We need both of those for social work continuing education credits. If anybody has any questions regarding anything else other than this, I will put our education email also in the chat too.
Lovely. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to meet you all. And I would really love to connect with you. So please just reach out, drop me an email and say hi. It's lovely to meet up with you and we can all just support each other in this really important work that we all do. And the more tools we all have in our tool chest, the better. And the more contacts, it's the most wonderful thing we can do for all the animals and people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Carlos. Thank you.